Good morning, everyone. Great to be here again. I'm going to give you the short version first for those of you that have to run off and do something this afternoon, and then we'll delve into the full talk for the rest of us who like to enjoy such things. Yesterday, I was doing something I put off for a long, long time because it's been a long, hot summer, and I have this metal storage shed out in the backyard that really needs to be cleaned out once in a while. And so yesterday I decided to do that. And in the process, I had some large pictures that were up against the wall, and I needed to move them. And so when I picked them up, a bunch of South Florida palmetto bugs cascaded off of the back of the pictures down onto my bare legs because I was in shorts, and I was triggered. And for those of you that don't enjoy the South Florida climate, our palmetto bugs are akin to the subway rats in New York. So you can appreciate the reaction I had, and I was triggered by my dislike of that experience, and had the opportunity to recognize the signal that I should probably clean out my shed more often, and I wouldn't have that experience. So that's the short version. Okay, so let's delve into the full talk now for those of you that have a moment, can give yourself the gift of a few minutes here to enjoy this. So a trigger, by that example, you can see a trigger trips off an inevitable cascade of predictable events. In a gun, for example, the hammer falls, the firing pin slams forward into the primer cap, igniting the propellant charge, sending its bullet accelerating down the gun barrel and outward toward whatever it's aimed at. The bullet has no choice in the matter, not in what gun it's loaded into, nor what side of an argument that gun might happen to be on. It does not even control its path of flight. All manner of physics play into that. So you see, claiming to have been triggered releases us from responsibility. We have no control over the consequences when we are triggered. So no wonder so many choose to be triggered over what is really happening. We see we are really receiving a signal that sends us into a whole different briar patch. Excuse me. A signal illuminates a choice of paths, and choice puts us at the helm, making us responsible for the consequences. Now, I'd like to step back just a second and come up with, where does this subject come from? I was on a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago with several Centers for Spiritual Living senior ministers. And Dr. David Alt brought this idea to the forefront. And the second I heard it, because I'm always looking for where's my next talk coming from. The second I heard it, I go, that's my talk. Triggers or signals. What an important subject for people who are open to receiving spiritual messages to understand. We are so easily triggered by day-to-day events. So let's start thinking about those triggers as simply being signals that are trying to direct us toward a different outlook. So let's look at a typical trigger. School dress codes. Another subject that came up to me by simply listening to the news. The trigger for some is that dress codes are sexist. They imply that girls' fashion choices are a distraction for boys, which is not saying much for the opinion the authorities have for boys, although there is an element of truth to it. But is a clothing choice a trigger for purists, or is it a signal for help or attention? Now, just recently, I think in the last week or so, was that a mother, Kimberly Meda Rubio's daughter, was dress coded because her jeans were ripped. And you've seen them all. You wonder why do people pay $300 for a pair of jeans that's already ripped when, you can pay $30 for a pair of jeans and rip them yourself. But they do, and it's popular and apparently considered attractive. And that by itself wouldn't have been a big deal, except Kimberly's younger daughter, Lexi, is one of the victims of the Uvalde school shooting. She was murdered. So now her older sister is being dress coded for not dressing properly and being sent home from school. And I heard that and I go, did anyone think to ask how that child felt about being back at school so soon after that unthinkable tragedy of losing her little sister in a school where she was supposed to be safe? I have no personal knowledge beyond the facts just shared, but I wonder if the girl's choice was a quiet cry for attention and acknowledgement of her distress. What a missed opportunity, I thought, by the school to look past the expediency of policy to dig deeper into cause and see if there wasn't something more going on, if there wasn't a signal being set, instead of just being triggered by, oh, that's against the rules, we have to stop that. The expediency of policy. Through the power of the one mind that is Spirit uniting us all, reach out with me and tell the universe to act for healing with all these families affected by tragedy, whether it be an event like the school shootings or a hurricane slamming into your home. Let's reach out to the universe and know healing for all of these affected people in this moment. Now, the standard for boys' fashion generally encourages the dress for success mode, and as long as everyone sticks to it, the school appears successful. But is it? Uniforms of any type hide the signals individuality expresses. Ernest Holmes writes in the Science of Mind textbook that legitimate desire is the voice of spirit in you trying to indicate that the thing you desire is already on its way to you. And he quotes Jesus from the Bible, before they call, I will answer. We are spiritual beings seeking to be in alignment with Spirit in all ways. We are scanning the horizon for messages that lead us to the truth. And the messages are there to be discovered even before we call Spirit answers. But these messages come in many forms. Those of us who study Science of Mind and similar teachings are training ourselves to be aware, to recognize messages that come from the many sources. And that is our responsibility. We have to recognize the messages. They don't always come with flashing lights and bells ringing off the side. We've got to see it within whatever's going on around us. Many of you may remember Wally from the old Leave It to Beaver television show. If you don't, please YouTube it, something, find it out there and look at it. To the adults, Wally was always polite and generous, but his peers knew better. He was always up to mischief, and the audience was in on the joke. Now, I suspect this subtle exposure of blatant hypocrisy opened the eyes of my generation to the many unspoken truths that have found voice in the decades since. The presence of this signal came at an opportune time in our history. If Wally was not as he appeared to be, what other givens should be questioned? For example, does race really determine intelligence? Well, Leave It to Beaver was on in the late 50s and early 60s, so a lot of its audience was returning World War II veterans. And a lot of them came home because of the intelligence and courage of peoples they never attributed much value to before learning to trust them in the wartime situations. The race trigger serves as an opportunity to examine our beliefs to see if they hold water. The real time, real life experience of working and fighting with people of different races and backgrounds forced many returning veterans to re examine their long held beliefs, and Spirit used that window to provide voices and leadership to nudge forward the needle of our common consciousness. Does gender determine value? Those same veterans relied on machines and munitions often built by women on the home front. Does who we love determine our right to live? Societies throughout time have accepted all gender definitions, and it has only become a problem where people have chosen to make it a problem. The gender trigger is Spirit signaling us to seek realignment. God don't make no junk. Who are we to judge? Spiritually, we know all people are valuable because we are all of the one mind. It is only when we accept duality that we start to pick and choose, assigning more value to one than another. Here's another trigger to examine. Taxes. The universal boogeyman we can all get behind, the dislike of paying taxes. We pay taxes so our governments can provide services that we all benefit from. Infrastructure and defense can usually muster consensus support. After that, it gets sticky, and even those two have detractors. Some believe that certain services are better provided by the private sector, while others support public works. And this is where our signals often cross. Relying on church charities to take care of social issues such as homelessness, hunger, income challenges, for example, puts a tax on churchgoers. Contributions are tax deductible, denying funds to the government, but are only paid by those who choose to go or at least support a church. So some people are triggered by that. They're saying, well, I guess I can get out of helping anybody by not going to church and not paying taxes. Yay for me, I win. But do you? This is de facto government sponsorship of a church, an idea the U.S. Constitution frowns upon with good reason, you see, because ironically, every church seems to think the country would be okay under its laws, but not the laws of those other guys, whoever they are. The idea that more people would support a church to enjoy the tax deduction has proven to be of whole cloth, since it has never worked, and church participation continues to decline. People will pitch in when disaster strikes, but social issues are long-term, and there are no quick fixes. Publicly supported, open-ended platforms of flexible programs can sustain the social engineering required to improve the human condition. A job best funded by all of us, with all of us having a voice in how to do these things without anyone being forced to bend their principles into pretzels. It's not an easy job. But if we work together, we can develop workable solutions. The teacher Jesus illuminated a signal when he told his followers to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, recognizing that there are advantages for civilized people to having government provide certain services paid for by the people being governed. And yet we continue to be triggered by the mere thought of having to contribute to the society we live in. Holmes writes again in the textbook that dogma goes beyond this into the arrogant assertion of doctrine, even to the point of indicating its authority to state what others shall think and believe. Religious and political dogma uses triggers to gain influence over people who are conditioned to accept perceived authority without question. Tell people a lie that feeds into their fear, then repeat it using half-truths to reinforce the lie. For example, a tweet I read earlier this week. One person was expressing their dislike of a female politician whom a defender described as a strong-willed and independent thinker. And by strong-willed, I mean willing to die on a hill of lies, fears, and hatred, despite all evidence to the contrary. And by independent, they must have been confusing her insane repetition of debunked conspiracy theories as courageous. The defender concluded that the attacker dislikes strong-willed independent women, and like thinking people would accept that as truth when the reality is the attacker was simply expressing their dislike of anyone who openly lies to gin up emotions among a constituency that is detached from its spiritual truth. People who understand their unity with spiritual truth, who live in their spiritual truth, cannot be swayed by dogma because they are not dependent on others to know what to think. Alignment with spiritual truth keeps us seeing ourselves in the eyes of others. We see brothers and sisters, not competitors and threats. People who have been conditioned all their lives to accept that they are better than others only because of the color of their skin or the church of their family see anyone unlike themselves as a threat to their status quo. Believing their power is derived from the group people identify with opens these unenlightened persons to being triggered by charged words and selective information. Their truth gets routed through a series of interpreters who, like a message encoding machine, switches each letter of the message again and again until a completely unintelligible string of letters comes out at the other end. But the interpreter assures that this is the true meaning of the message, and the faithful fall in line without question. This belief in duality, this acceptance that the message comes out differently than how it goes in, makes the interpreter indispensable and thus all-powerful. Can you think of a better way to hold control over a population? The model has been tried repeatedly throughout history. It is still in use and still holds sway over unenlightened peoples. There is a flaw in this system, however. It is susceptible to the truth. And in every population there are people who know and live spiritual truth. A spiritually aware person does not rely on an interpreter. We understand that we are directly wired to spirit, so no encoding machine is involved. When we do feel triggered, we recognize it as a signal that we are stepping out of alignment with our spiritual truth. Failing to recognize the signal can send us well into the briar patch of fear and distrust. We can become mired down in anxiety, anger, and depression with the best of them. We can lose sight of the light and become lost in darkness. Unlike our spiritually unaware brothers, we cannot seek relief through the persecution of others. We know in our hearts the only path back for us is to release the idea of fear and anger and recognize the error in our thinking. Reconnecting to our spiritual truth, recognizing we missed a signal and correcting our course through a series of new choices brings us back into alignment. Unlike our spiritually unaware brothers, we can find our way back into the light because we are not counting on others to take us there. In a world of people who accept the concept of duality, where an interpreter is required to discern the truth, there is no incentive for those interpreters to ever deliver the message of simple truth as the spiritually aware know it. A universal truth among all science of mind teachers is the longing for a day when we are no longer needed or in any way unique. I can happily prosper from showing off my feet on OnlyFans.com if everyone in the world recognizes their immediate and constant unity with Spirit. David also reminded us that insanity is trying to force a single-dimensional answer on a multi-dimensional experience. Until then, we will experience triggers, and those triggers will send us down fiery paths of indignation until we catch ourselves and realize we're being signaled to examine our beliefs. Peel back the layers of cause and effect that have brought us to this moment and choose a different path, certain only that this course correction is just the first of many to follow. And finally, as stated earlier, this is an inside job. The science of mind teaches us how to think, not what to think. All of our healing is done through involution, where we find our answers, our truth from within, and use it to build our outward experience. No single event or word loaded the gun in our mind, so we are fools to expect any single revelation to be the last revelation we will ever need. Thank you.